Welcome to this podcast entitled The Louisiana Purchase and Exploration. In the last podcast, you learned about some of the changes made by Jefferson and his political party. In this one, you'll learn how the nation doubled in size. In the 1800s, thousands of settlers moved westward across the Appalachian Mountains. They are shown right there by that red line. They moved into areas long inhabited by Native Americans. Even so, some of these areas soon became American states. Kentucky and Tennessee, and here's Kentucky, and there is Tennessee, had become states by 1800, and Ohio became a state by 1803. There was much activity further west too. In 1800, France and Spain negotiated for ownership of the Louisiana Territory, which is shown right here. The Louisiana Territory was the vast region between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. Also, along the Pacific coast, Spain, Russia, the United States, and Great Britain were all setting up settlements, many of those up in the Oregon country. As the number of Westerners grew, so did their political power. And an important issue for many settlers was the use of the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans. Westerners used the river and the port to send their goods to East Coast markets. New Orleans was originally claimed by France. After losing the French and Indian War, France turned it over to Spain. But then, in a secret treaty in 1800, Spain agreed to return the Louisiana Territory, including New Orleans, to France's leader, Napoleon. Now, Napoleon wanted to colonize the territory. In 1802, these changes nearly resulted in war. Just before returning the colony over to France, Spain closed New Orleans to U.S. ships. Westerners called for war against Spain and France. See, the U.S. felt Spain violated an earlier treaty. You remember when we talked about Pinckney's Treaty? The U.S. was also worried about Napoleon's plan to expand and colonize. To avoid war, Jefferson offered to buy New Orleans from France. He received a surprising offer back. France offered to sell the entire Louisiana Territory to the United States. Jefferson wanted to accept the offer, but he had a problem. You remember in previous podcasts how we talked about how Jefferson was a strict constructionist. You may remember that from our discussion on the National Bank, and he said, if it's not written in the Constitution, you can't do it. Well, he's got a problem because since he believes in the strict interpretation of the Constitution, nowhere does it say that a president can buy land. But he also believed in a nation of independent farmers, and that required land. So he was stuck between whether or not he's going to stick with his strict idea of how the Constitution can be interpreted, or if he's going to change to being a loose constructionist. Well, on April 30th of 1803, the Louisiana Purchase was approved for $15 million. The purchase gave the United States the port of New Orleans and doubled the size of the country. And you can see that right here. This part right here was what we previously had. So that just about doubles the size of the country. And again, that price tag was $15 million. So I guess he found a way to get past that strict construction idea. And now that he's president, it was a little easier to see that sometimes presidents feel like it's necessary to stretch the rules. Jefferson planned an expedition to explore the Louisiana Territory. He chose Captain Meriwether Lewis to lead the expedition. Lewis chose his old friend Lieutenant William Clark to put together a volunteer force for the trip. Clark was skilled as a map maker and an outdoorsman, and I'll show you some of those pictures from his journal in just a second. The trip soon became known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition. Lewis and Clark set out in the summer of 1803, and by winter they reached the town of St. Louis. They stayed in the town throughout the winter, and in May 1804, the explorers left St. Louis and headed up the Missouri River. Now, many explorers took off from St. Louis as they were headed west, and today there is a monument to the explorers who left from St. Louis. That is a picture of the Gateway Arch. It's a beautiful structure. And this is, you can go up inside the arch, and this is what you see. When you look out of the arch, see there's a baseball stadium, and that is where the St. Louis Cardinals play, out the window there. Well, Lewis and Clark had specific instructions from Thomas Jefferson. They were told they needed to explore rivers. They were looking for an all-water route across the continents. They were told to treat Native Americans with respect and to keep a journal of what they learned. So here's a look at their trip. They took off from St. Louis and up the Missouri River, and then across the Rockies, and ultimately they made it to the Pacific Ocean, and then they returned back. And here's a look at a couple of pages from William Clark's journal. So clearly this one is talking about fish, animals, perhaps that they had found as they were making their travels. So William Clark would have written about these things, and also about plant life, and maybe some about the Native Americans that they encountered. I'm going to guess that this is about a tribe called the Flathead tribe. And they were known to live and still live up in the Montana area. In the spring of 1805, the expedition set out again along with a French trapper and his wife, Sacagawea. She was a Shoshone Indian whose language skills and knowledge of geography helped Lewis and Clark. So she's shown here, and perhaps you've seen the movie Night at the Museum, and there's a character played Sacagawea in the movie. As the explorers traveled towards the Rocky Mountains, Sacagawea pointed out Shoshone lands. When they finally made contact with the chief, he recognized Sacagawea as his sister. The explorers crossed the Rocky Mountains with the help of the Shoshone, then journeyed to the Columbia River, which I showed you on that map, which led them ultimately to the Pacific Ocean. In 1806, the explorers returned to the east, and they brought back valuable scientific and geographic information. Now Lewis and Clark were known as the only explorers who had explored through the Louisiana Territory. In 1806, another expedition led by Zebulon Pike left St. Louis to explore southern areas of Louisiana. And you can see Pike's journey. Pike made two journeys, actually, the one right here, and the second one is the one that I'm going to be talking to you about. Pike's mission was to find the boundary waters between the Spanish territory and the Louisiana territory. So Pike's party headed westward across the Great Plains. They followed the Arkansas River towards the Rocky Mountains, and when they reached the Rocky Mountains, they turned south. They hoped to run into the Red River. Instead, they ran into the Rio Grande River, and that is a river in Spanish territory. And you can see that over here, once they passed this point, they found the Rio Grande River, but they were in Spanish territory. And because of that, they got busted and they got arrested. They were arrested by Spanish troops. Spanish officials later released them, fortunately, and they were able to bring back with them important descriptions of the Great Plains and the valley of the Rio Grande River. So there you have it, the Louisiana Purchase and Exploration, and how the nation doubled during the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. Hope this helped. Have a great day.